The vast expanse of the Arctic Ocean stretched endlessly under a pale, overcast sky. Gentle waves lapped against the sides of a modest fishing boat, its crew working steadily to haul in the day's catch. The icy wind carried the distant cries of seabirds, creating a serene yet isolating atmosphere. It was mid-morning in early spring, a season of fragile transitions in these harsh, frozen waters. On board was Thomas, a retired fisherman in his late 60s, whose love for the sea had never wavered despite his advancing years. His gnarled hands worked deftly alongside the younger crew members, tying knots and sorting the shimmering fish that glistened on the deck. Thomas was a fixture on these trips, a source of wisdom and quiet strength for the team. Though his life had slowed in many ways, the rhythm of the ocean still called to him, providing solace and purpose. As the boat rocked gently with the waves, one of the crew members, a sharp-eyed young man named Eric, pointed toward the horizon. "What's that?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. All eyes turned to follow his outstretched finger. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a distant shadow against the gray backdrop of the sea. But as the object moved closer, its form became unmistakable. A polar bear, paddling slowly but deliberately toward the boat. The crew exchanged startled glances. It wasn't unheard of for wildlife to appear near the fishing grounds, but polar bears typically stayed on the ice floes, far from human activity. This one, however, seemed determined, its large body slicing through the frigid water with purpose. As it drew nearer, they noticed something unusual. The bear was vocalizing, its deep, mournful cries cutting through the cold air. Thomas stepped forward, his experienced eyes narrowing as he studied the animal. "That's no ordinary behavior," he murmured, his tone serious. "Something's wrong." The bear reached the boat and paused, treading water as it looked up at the crew. Its dark eyes, usually fierce and commanding, were filled with something unexpected, an almost human-like urgency. It let out another low, plaintive sound, raising its head toward the deck as if pleading for attention. Eric leaned over the side, his curiosity giving way to concern. "What do you think it wants?" he asked. Thomas shook his head slowly. "It's not here by chance," he said. "We need to figure out what it's trying to tell us." The crew hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Polar bears, though majestic, were also dangerous, their strength and speed unmatched in the wild. But this one showed no signs of aggression. Instead, it floated patiently, its massive paws paddling gently against the current. The mournful cries continued, a haunting sound that seemed to pierce through the noise of the wind and waves. "Let's throw it some fish," one of the younger crew members suggested. "Maybe it's just hungry." Thomas considered the idea, but quickly shook his head. "This isn't about food," he said firmly. "Look at its eyes, there's something more." Suddenly, the bear turned its head toward the distant ice floes, letting out another deep, echoing cry. It paddled a short distance away from the boat, then stopped and turned back, as if urging the crew to follow. "It's trying to lead us somewhere," Thomas said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to follow it." The suggestion was met with murmurs of unease. Following a polar bear into open water was far from standard procedure. But Thomas's intuition, honed by decades on the sea, carried weight. "I've seen animals do remarkable things," he said. "They know more than we give them credit for. If this bear is asking for help, there's a reason." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, then nodded in agreement. With Thomas at the helm, they turned the boat toward the direction the bear had indicated. The polar bear swam ahead, its powerful strokes steady and determined. The crew watched in silence, their usual chatter replaced by a sense of awe and anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, they knew it was something they would never forget. The fishing boat cut through the icy waters, its engine humming steadily as it followed the polar bear's lead. The animal swam with remarkable endurance, pausing occasionally to glance back and ensure the vessel was still behind. The crew remained silent, a mix of awe and unease hanging over them. Even the youngest among them, known for his playful banter, was uncharacteristically quiet. Thomas stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the bear. Years of navigating the sea had taught him to trust the instincts of its creatures, but this encounter felt different. "It's almost like it knows what it's doing," he muttered to himself. "Like it's guiding us." After nearly an hour, the bear slowed, paddling toward a large ice floe that floated unevenly in the choppy water. As the boat approached, the crew could see that the floe was riddled with cracks and dark patches where the ice had thinned dangerously. The polar bear climbed onto the floe, its massive paws crunching the fragile surface. It turned to face the boat, letting out another mournful cry. "What's it doing?" Eric asked, leaning over the side of the vessel. Thomas motioned for the engine to be cut, and the boat drifted to a stop a safe distance from the ice. "Something's here," he said, his voice steady. "Something it wants us to see." The crew watched intently as the bear moved across the floe, sniffing the air and pawing at the surface. Then, with surprising delicacy, it began to dig. Bits of ice flew into the air as the bear's powerful claws worked tirelessly, revealing a small, dark opening beneath the surface. Thomas grabbed a pair of binoculars and scanned the scene. "It's uncovered something," he said, handing the binoculars to Eric. "Look." Eric's eyes widened as he focused on the hole. "It's moving," he whispered. "There's something alive in there." With growing urgency, the crew prepared to investigate. Thomas and Eric lowered a small inflatable raft into the water, carefully stepping aboard with a rope and a long pole for support. The rest of the crew watched anxiously from the deck as the two men paddled toward the floe. The polar bear didn't retreat as they approached. Instead, it sat a short distance from the hole, its eyes fixed on the humans, as if willing them to act. "It's not afraid," Eric said quietly. "It knows we're here to help." As they reached the edge of the floe, Thomas secured the raft with the rope and climbed onto the ice. His boots crunched against the fragile surface as he approached the hole, the polar bear watching his every move. Kneeling down, he peered into the opening, and his breath caught. Inside the hole was a small polar bear cub, its white fur barely visible against the ice. The cub was weak and trembling, its tiny body pressed against the icy walls of the crevice. Its cries were faint, but its wide, frightened eyes locked onto Thomas's. "It's her cub," Thomas said, his voice filled with emotion. "She brought us here to save her baby." Eric climbed onto the ice, his movements slow and careful. "What do we do?" he asked, glancing between the cub and its mother who remained nearby, her body tense but calm. "We get it out," Thomas replied, gently. With Eric's help, Thomas used the pole to widen the opening, careful not to let the ice collapse further. He removed his thick jacket and reached into the crevice, wrapping the cub in the insulated fabric. The tiny bear let out a feeble cry as Thomas lifted it free, its small body fitting easily into his arms. The mother polar bear let out a loud, echoing cry, her posture shifting from tense anticipation to visible relief. She moved closer but kept a safe distance, her dark eyes fixed on her cub. "We've got it," Thomas said softly, his breath visible in the icy air. We're going to save it." Back on the boat, the crew scrambled to prepare a makeshift enclosure for the cub, using blankets and tarps to create a warm, secure space. Thomas and Eric carefully transported the cub from the float to the boat, its mother following alongside the raft, her powerful strokes keeping pace with them. Once aboard, the cub was placed in the enclosure, where it quickly fell into an exhausted but peaceful sleep. The mother bear remained in the water, circling the boat and letting out soft, almost musical calls. It was clear she trusted the humans but wanted reassurance that her baby was safe. Thomas leaned over the side, his voice steady but gentle. "We'll take care of it," he said, as though the bear could understand him. "I promise." The crew worked tirelessly to ensure the cub's comfort and safety, as the fishing boat charted a course toward the nearest wildlife rescue station. Despite the urgency, they moved carefully, mindful of the fragile and frightened animal in their care. The mother polar bear swam beside the boat, never straying far, her dark eyes fixed on the small enclosure where her cub lay resting. Thomas kept a close watch on both bears, his experienced hands steady on the helm. "She's not going anywhere," he said quietly. "She'll follow us until she knows her baby is safe." The sight of the massive bear pacing the water alongside them left the crew in awe. "She's trusting us," Eric said, his voice tinged with wonder. "She could attack us at any moment, but she hasn't." Thomas nodded. "She knows we're helping. Animals are smarter than we give them credit for." As the boat cut through the icy waves, the cub stirred weakly in its enclosure. Laura, another crew member with a gentle touch, knelt beside the cub, speaking to it softly. "You're a fighter," she murmured, adjusting the blankets to ensure it stayed warm. "You're going to be okay." The tiny bear let out a faint cry, its eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again. Laura glanced up at Thomas, concern etched on her face. "It's so small," she said. "Do you think it'll make it?" "It has to," Thomas replied firmly, "and we're going to make sure it does." Hours passed, the boat's engine humming steadily as it approached the rescue station. The mother bear's endurance was remarkable. She swam tirelessly alongside the vessel, her powerful strokes slicing through the frigid water. At one point she paused, letting out a mournful call that sent a chill through the crew. "She's worried," Eric said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She doesn't understand what's happening." Thomas leaned over the side of the boat, his voice steady but soothing. "We're almost there," he said, "just a little longer." The mother bear resumed her pace, her determination evident in every movement. The bond between her and her cub was undeniable, a force that transcended the barriers between species. When the boat finally reached the rescue station, the crew was met by a team of wildlife specialists. They worked quickly to assess the cub's condition, providing fluids and nutrition to stabilize the tiny animal. The mother bear watched from the water, her cries growing louder and more insistent as the team carried the cub inside. "She's not going to leave," Laura said, her voice trembling. "We can't just separate them." One of the wildlife specialists, a woman named Dr. Carter, nodded in agreement. "We'll do everything we can to reunite them," she said. "But first, we need to ensure the cub survives." Inside the station, the cub was placed in a warm, secure environment, where the team monitored its progress closely. The mother bear, meanwhile, remained near the dock, pacing anxiously as she waited for news. Thomas and the crew stayed nearby, unwilling to leave until they knew the outcome. As night fell, the station's floodlights illuminated the water, casting a soft glow over the waiting bear. She let out occasional cries, each one filled with a longing that tugged at the hearts of everyone present. "She's not giving up," Eric said quietly. "She's been through so much, but she's still fighting." "And so are we," Thomas replied. "We're not going to let her down." The hours stretched on, but the crew refused to rest. They took turns checking on the cub and watching the mother bear, their exhaustion outweighed by their determination. Slowly but surely, the cub began to show signs of improvement. Its breathing steadied, and its small cries grew stronger. Dr. Carter emerged from the rescue station, a faint smile on her face. "The cub's responding well," she said. "It's going to need care, but it's strong. It has a chance." Thomas let out a breath of relief, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. "And the mother?" he asked. "We'll reunite them as soon as it's safe," Dr. Carter assured him. "She's been extraordinary. Most bears wouldn't behave this way. Her determination is what saved her cub." The news spread quickly, and the crew gathered at the dock to watch the mother bear. She seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere, her cries softening as she floated near the edge of the water. For the first time, there was hope. A fragile but undeniable light in the darkness of the Arctic night. The morning sun rose over the icy expanse, casting a golden glow on the rescue station and the surrounding waters. The mother polar bear had stayed by the dock all night, her large frame barely moving except for the occasional cry toward the station. She was exhausted but resolute, her patience a testament to her unbreakable bond with her cub. Inside the station, the cub had gained strength. Under the attentive care of Dr. Carter and her team, the tiny polar bear was now sitting upright, its bright eyes reflecting a spark of resilience. "It's ready," Dr. Carter said to Thomas, who had stayed awake alongside the mother bear. "We've stabilized it enough for the reunion, but we need to be careful. This has to go smoothly." The crew gathered at the dock, their breaths visible in the frosty morning air. The mother bear swam closer as they carried the small enclosure to the water's edge, her deep, soulful eyes fixed on the cub. The cries she let out now were softer, filled with anticipation rather than desperation. Laura stood next to Thomas, her hands clasped tightly together. "This is it," she whispered. "She's waited so long." Dr. Carter knelt by the enclosure, speaking softly to the cub as she opened it. "Time to go back to your mom," she said gently. The little bear hesitated, its small body trembling as it stepped out onto the icy dock. It looked around briefly before letting out a tentative cry. The mother's reaction was immediate. She let out a series of high-pitched calls, paddling closer and pulling herself onto the ice. Her massive frame moved with surprising delicacy as she approached her cub. The little bear ran toward her, its small legs slipping slightly on the ice. When they met, the mother lowered her head, nuzzling her cub gently, as if reassuring it that everything was all right. The reunion was so moving that even the toughest crew members wiped their eyes. "I've never seen anything like this," Eric said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's like she's telling it, 'I'll never let you go again.'" The two bears stayed close, the mother licking her cub's fur and wrapping her massive paw around its small body. The tenderness of the moment was almost surreal, a reminder of the incredible bond between parent and child, even in the wildest parts of nature. The mother bear turned toward the humans, her dark eyes locking onto Thomas and Dr. Carter. For a moment, it felt as though she was acknowledging their efforts, a silent expression of gratitude. Then, with her cub in tow, she began to make her way back to the water. The crew and rescue team watched in awe as the two bears swam together, their movements synchronized as they headed toward the distant ice floes. The cub stayed close to its mother, occasionally climbing onto her back for rest. It was a picture of survival, resilience, and the lengths a mother would go to protect her child. Word of the rescue spread quickly, with the news outlets picking up the story and sharing it across the globe. The image of the polar bears' reunion became a symbol of hope and determination, inspiring countless people to take action for wildlife conservation. Donations poured into the rescue station, allowing them to expand their efforts and help even more animals in need. Laura, Eric, and the rest of the crew became local heroes, their story a testament to the power of compassion and teamwork. But for Thomas, the real hero was the mother bear. "She never gave up," he said during an interview. "She did everything she could to save her cub, and she trusted us to help. That kind of courage and love is something we can all learn from." As the boat prepared to leave the dock, Thomas stood at the edge, gazing toward the horizon where the bears had disappeared. "They'll make it," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "They've got each other." Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. "And because of you, they've got a chance," she said. Thomas nodded, his heart full. For him and the crew, the experience was more than just a rescue. It was a reminder of the fragile beauty of the world they worked in, and the incredible connections that could arise when humans and nature came together. The rescue and reunion of the polar bears became a defining moment for everyone involved. The fishing crew returned to their usual routes, but their perspectives had shifted. For them, the sea was no longer just a workplace. It was a habitat teeming with life, where every creature had a story worth protecting. Thomas, in particular, felt a renewed sense of purpose. In the weeks following the rescue, he began volunteering with the wildlife station, sharing his maritime experience to help with other animal rescues. "The sea has given me so much," he said. "It's time I gave something back." The story of the polar bear and her cub resonated far beyond the Arctic waters. It was shared in classrooms and conservation campaigns, inspiring people of all ages to take action for the planet. Donations and volunteers poured into the wildlife station, enabling them to expand their programs and reach more animals in need. Dr. Carter, deeply moved by the event, spearheaded a new initiative to protect polar bear habitats. She partnered with local fishermen and Arctic communities to establish a network for reporting and responding to wildlife emergencies. "This isn't just about one bear," she said during a press conference. "It's about preserving a world where these stories can continue to happen." Months after the rescue, the crew received an update from a wildlife monitoring team. The mother bear and her cub had been spotted on a nearby ice floe, thriving together in the frigid wilderness. The cub, now stronger and more active, had begun to explore its environment under the watchful eye of its mother. The team shared photos including one of the bears resting together under the Arctic sun, a poignant reminder of the bond that had driven the mother to seek help in the first place. When the news reached Thomas and the crew, it was met with cheers and tears of relief. "They made it," Eric said, grinning as he passed the photos around. "They're safe." Thomas studied the images carefully, his heart swelling with pride. "She kept her promise," he said quietly. "She fought for her cub, and now they're where they belong." The impact of the story lingered in the hearts of the crew and their community. Children wrote essays and drew pictures of the bears, their colorful artwork displayed proudly at the local wildlife center. Families came together to learn about conservation, inspired by the incredible journey of a mother's love and determination. Even on the fishing boat, the crew found themselves talking more about the wildlife they encountered. Their appreciation for the sea's inhabitants deepened by the experience. For Laura, Eric, and the others, every trip on the water felt like an opportunity to honor the lesson the polar bear had taught them. On a cold winter evening, Thomas stood alone on the dock, gazing out at the icy horizon. The stars above reflected on the calm waters, casting a silvery glow over the scene. He thought of the mother bear and her cub, picturing them nestled safely on an ice floe under the same sky. "We're all connected," he said softly to himself, "in ways we don't always understand." As he turned to leave, a shooting star streaked across the sky, its light momentarily illuminating the dark. For Thomas, it felt like a sign, a reminder that even in the coldest, most desolate places, there was warmth to be found in the bonds we shared. If this story of courage, love, and survival moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's work together to protect our planet and its incredible wildlife. Every action counts.